I never thought my own father would look me in the eye and say, "I know you paid off the entire $680,000 mortgage, but your brother needs the house more than you do." Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Rhea. I'm the older daughter, the one who always handled problems quietly. When my parents were close to losing their house, I stepped in. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, and lived simply. Every dollar I saved went toward that mortgage. It took years, but I finally paid it off. I felt proud, not because of the house, but because my parents were safe. My brother Cale was never around during that time. He jumped from job to job and always needed help. My parents worried about him constantly. I didn't mind helping, because family is family. I believed my effort mattered. Then came the family meeting. My dad spoke calmly, like this was already decided. They wanted to give the house to Cale so he could start fresh. My mom stayed quiet. No one asked how I felt. I was shocked. I reminded them I paid for everything. My dad said I was strong and independent, and Cale needed support more. That sentence hurt more than anything else. It made my sacrifice sound like a weakness. I didn't argue. I went home and looked through my records. Every payment was from my account. My name was tied to the payoff. I had proof. When I refused to sign the transfer papers, the mood changed fast. Suddenly, they wanted to talk. But it was too late. I chose myself for once. I didn't take the house out of anger. I took my dignity back. And that choice finally gave me peace. My name is Rhea Collins, and I've always been the one who stayed steady when everything else broke. I wasn't loud or demanding. I didn't ask for praise. When trouble showed up, I handled it and moved on. That became my role early, and no one ever questioned it. While others chased comfort, I chose responsibility. I put personal plans on hold, including settling down or building a life of my own. Relationships ended because I was never fully present. I kept saying, later, believing there would be time once things were stable. I took extra shifts whenever they were offered. Nights blended into mornings. Weekends disappeared. I wore the same clothes for years, skipped trips, and counted every dollar. Small apartments, old furniture, basic meals, those became normal to me. I told myself it was temporary. All of it had one purpose, keeping my parents from losing the place they had lived in for decades. Notices kept coming. Deadlines kept closing in. Each time, I stepped forward. I didn't make speeches about it. I just paid what needed to be paid. No one pushed me to do it. No one stopped me either. The expectation was quiet but clear. I was the reliable one. The strong one. The one who would figure it out. Sometimes I felt tired in ways sleep didn't fix. I watched people my age move ahead, buying homes, starting families, living freely. I told myself sacrifice was part of love, that loyalty meant endurance. I truly believed what I was doing mattered. Not as a favor, not as charity, but as proof that commitment meant something. I wasn't looking for applause. I only thought effort would be remembered. I didn't know then that giving everything without asking could teach people the wrong lesson. I thought I was protecting my family. I didn't realize I was slowly disappearing inside that choice. That building held more than walls and rooms. It carried years of tension, whispered arguments, and quiet hope. I remember sitting at the kitchen table while overdue letters stacked beside unpaid statements. My mother would stare at them in silence, tears slipping down without a sound. I learned early not to interrupt moments like that. My father used to speak differently back then. Late at night, when everything felt uncertain, he would tell me not to worry. He said stability mattered, that effort meant something, and that loyalty would never be forgotten. One evening, standing near the hallway, he looked at me and said those words that stayed with me for years, that this place would belong to me one day. I didn't ask questions. I didn't request paperwork. I trusted him because trust felt natural inside those walls. That assurance became the reason I kept going when exhaustion crept in. It gave meaning to every sacrifice I made without complaint. Each payment came straight from what I had built for myself. Accounts emptied slowly. Emergency funds disappeared. Plans I once imagined faded quietly. Still, I felt calm knowing the roof remained secure. Every cleared balance felt like protecting history itself. That structure held birthdays, holidays, and memories of better times. It represented safety during moments when everything else felt unstable. Losing it would have meant losing a piece of who we were. So I chose preservation over comfort. I convinced myself that keeping it standing was worth any personal cost. I believed responsibility carried honor, and promises carried weight. I never imagined those words could be treated like passing comfort instead of commitment. I didn't think reassurance could expire once it became inconvenient. At the time, I thought I was investing in something permanent, something built on trust rather than documents. What I didn't understand then was how easily spoken assurances can fade when circumstances change. I held on to that belief because it gave purpose to everything I gave up. Without it, none of those choices would have made sense. Every payment came from me alone. No shared burden. No backup plan. I carried the full weight quietly while others continued life as usual. There were no offers to split costs, no check-ins, no discussions about fairness. It was simply assumed I would handle it. Statements arrived month after month, each one demanding more. I rearranged budgets, cut necessities, and accepted exhaustion as normal. When emergencies came up, I absorbed those too. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody asked how I was managing. Silence became the agreement. Cale never contributed a single dollar. He never mentioned the balance or asked how close it was to being cleared. He lived freely, confident someone else would clean up the mess. That someone was always me. My parents didn't insist otherwise. Their trust in me felt less like respect and more like convenience. I never received thanks, only expectations. If a deadline approached, they looked to me. If stress filled the room, they waited for my solution. Responsibility settled on my shoulders without discussion, as if reliability erased the need for consent. There were moments when resentment tried to surface, but I pushed it down. I convinced myself that stepping up defined character. I believed consistency mattered more than recognition. Each cleared notice felt like proof that effort could stabilize chaos. Years passed that way. I became efficient at sacrifice. I stopped talking about strain because no one wanted to hear it. The assumption stayed unspoken yet firm: I would continue, no matter the cost. What hurt wasn't the money. It was the way contribution became invisible once it was expected. Being dependable slowly turned into being taken for granted. The more I gave, the less it seemed to count. By the time the final amount was settled, there was no celebration. No acknowledgement. Just relief that the crisis was over, for everyone except me. I stood alone with drained accounts and unanswered questions, realizing that reliability can quietly turn into obligation when boundaries are never drawn. Cale's life followed the same cycle again and again. He started things with confidence, then walked away when effort was required. 2 different programs were abandoned before completion. Each time, there was an excuse ready: pressure, unfair treatment, bad timing. Consequences never stayed long enough to teach anything. Money flowed toward him easily. Small loans at first, then larger amounts. None of it returned. Promises were made casually and forgotten just as quickly. When reminders surfaced, my parents waved them off, saying he needed patience, not pressure. Whenever things collapsed for him, a safety net appeared. Rent got covered. Mistakes were reframed as learning experiences. Responsibility was postponed instead of demanded. He never truly fell because someone always broke the fall. I watched this pattern quietly. There was no anger at first, only confusion. I wondered why effort seemed optional for him but mandatory for me. I didn't receive cushions or second chances. I received expectations. In the family's eyes, he was fragile. I was solid. That single difference changed everything. His instability invited protection. My steadiness invited dependence. The more consistent I became, the less visible my effort felt. Sacrifice blended into the background, like furniture that's always been there. No one noticed how much space it took until it was gone. My endurance wasn't praised because it was assumed. My limits weren't considered because I rarely voiced them. Excuses followed him like permission slips. Accountability never stuck. Each rescue confirmed he didn't need to change. Meanwhile, I adjusted constantly, bending without breaking, because that was what was expected of me. I realized something painful over time: being dependable made my contributions easy to ignore. Reliability became my identity, not my effort. And once that happened, everything I gave lost its weight. While his failures were explained away with concern, my consistency erased itself. I wasn't seen as someone giving too much. I was seen as someone who could always give more. That afternoon felt staged before I even understood why. Everyone sat in the living room with forced calm, like a decision had already been finalized elsewhere. No one asked how my day was. No small talk. Just a pause that felt heavy and deliberate. My father cleared his throat and spoke in a measured tone, the kind he used when he didn't want interruption. He said there had been careful consideration. He said this was about fairness and future security. Then he delivered it plainly, without hesitation: the property would be transferred to Kale. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. I waited for clarification, thinking I had misunderstood. None came. Instead, he added that this choice was necessary because Kale required consistency in his life. That phrase was repeated, as if repetition could turn it into truth. I looked toward my mother. She focused on her hands, tracing invisible lines along her palms. Her silence was louder than his explanation. She didn't defend me. She didn't challenge him. She simply stayed still. No one asked for my input. There was no discussion, no acknowledgement of contribution. The decision was presented as a completed task, not a proposal. I was expected to accept it quietly, the same way I had accepted everything else. My father continued speaking, filling the space with logic that felt rehearsed. He said I would understand. He said I had always managed well. He said this didn't change how they felt about me. Each sentence widened the distance between us. I realized this meeting wasn't about family, it was about justification. They weren't asking permission. They were informing me of my displacement. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I listened until there was nothing left to hear. The calm in the room wasn't peace. It was finality. When the conversation ended, nothing had been resolved, only revealed. In that moment, I understood something irreversible had occurred. Not a mistake. A choice. And it had already been made without me. I didn't feel angry at first. What hit me was something heavier, slower. My fingers wouldn't stay still. A strange tremor moved through them no matter how tightly I pressed them together. Breathing became shallow, like my lungs refused to fully open. It felt as if pressure had settled directly behind my ribs. I stood there, listening to my pulse in my ears, trying to stay upright. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. Heat rushed to my face, then drained away, leaving me cold and unsteady. I had never experienced hurt like that, quiet, sharp, and deeply personal. That was when understanding arrived. Everything I had poured into protecting that place hadn't been viewed as dedication. It hadn't been seen as commitment or responsibility. It was treated like a contribution anyone could redirect. Something given, not something earned. The realization cut deeper than the decision itself. Years of discipline, restraint, and endurance were reduced to a shared family resource. No ownership. No recognition. Just assumed availability. What I thought was a foundation turned out to be a convenience. My throat tightened as memories replayed, long hours, constant pressure, choices made without hesitation. I had believed effort created security. Instead, it created entitlement. The more I carried, the lighter everyone else felt. I wasn't losing a place. I was losing the meaning behind everything I had done. That distinction mattered. It explained why the pain felt physical, not emotional. My body reacted to the truth before my mind could soften it. There was no dramatic collapse. No raised voices. Just an internal shift, like something finally snapped into focus. I understood that loyalty without limits becomes invisible. Giving without protection invites erasure. Standing there, struggling to keep my balance, I knew something had ended. Not trust. Not love. Illusion. The belief that sacrifice automatically earns respect. That moment rewired how I saw my role. I wasn't valued for what I had built. I was valued for how much could be taken without resistance. And once that clarity settled in, the pain stopped being confusing. It became instructive. The tone shifted quickly once my silence stretched too long. Questions turned into judgments. I was asked why I couldn't be flexible, why I was making things difficult. The implication was clear: disagreement meant lack of compassion. Concern was reserved for one side only. I was told to think about the bigger picture. To consider how hard things had been for him. Words like generosity and family duty were used carefully, aimed in my direction. Suddenly, my hesitation was framed as greed. My boundaries were labeled cruelty. Someone said I had always managed on my own. That I was capable of rebuilding. That I had options. Those statements were delivered as compliments, but they felt like dismissal. My resilience was being used as justification to strip me of choice. I listened as they explained why this made sense. Their reasoning followed a familiar pattern: I could endure loss because I always had. They didn't ask whether I wanted to. They assumed endurance meant consent. That was the moment clarity settled in. The praise I received over the years hadn't been admiration. It had been preparation. Each acknowledgement of my toughness quietly trained me to accept more burden. Being dependable never earned protection. It earned expectation. My capability was turned into obligation. The narrative wasn't that I deserved less, it was that I could survive with less. I felt something shift internally, not with anger but with awareness. I stopped absorbing their language. I stopped accepting their definitions. Strength, I realized, had been rebranded as availability. The request to be understanding wasn't about empathy. It was about compliance. It was about maintaining a system where my needs stayed secondary because I wouldn't collapse without support. That understanding changed everything. Not because it excused their behavior, but because it exposed the pattern behind it. Once I saw it clearly, I could no longer participate in it. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply stopped carrying a role that had been assigned to me without consent. And in that quiet refusal, something reclaimed its place: my authority over what I give and what I don't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend my intentions or list everything I had done. There was no dramatic exit, no final argument. I simply stood up, gathered my things, and walked out with steady steps. Calm covered me in a way even I didn't recognize at first. The quiet followed me all the way home. Not the heavy kind filled with confusion, but a clear, settled stillness. My thoughts slowed. My chest felt lighter. It was as if something inside had finally stopped pushing against a locked door. For years, I had explained myself. My choices. My limits. My exhaustion. I had translated effort into words, hoping clarity would earn fairness. That habit ended in that moment. I understood that explanations only matter to people willing to listen. As I drove away, a realization settled in without force: continuing as before would only lead to the same result. Giving more wouldn't change the outcome. Reasoning wouldn't restore balance. Participation itself was the problem. I didn't feel guilt for leaving. I felt distance. Emotional space I hadn't allowed myself before. The need to be understood faded. In its place came something firmer, self-preservation. That decision wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't require confrontation. It was internal, decisive, and permanent. I chose to stop investing where return was never intended. I chose to step out of a role that erased me little by little. Walking away didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I stopped sacrificing myself to prove loyalty. There is a difference. I knew from that point forward I would no longer contribute to outcomes that excluded me. I would no longer supply effort to systems built on my silence. The pattern ended because I ended my participation in it. Nothing outside changed instantly. No apologies followed. No sudden understanding appeared. But something far more important shifted within me. I reclaimed control over where my energy went. I decided my work, time, and resources would no longer be used to diminish me. And for the first time in a long while, that choice felt solid. I didn't need validation to make it real. The decision stood on its own. What they didn't realize was how meticulous I had been. Every statement, every cleared check, every confirmation from the bank was carefully filed. I hadn't just paid the mortgage, I had created a paper trail that left nothing to chance. They assumed decisions could be made without me, that I would accept whatever they dictated. They didn't know that the official documents, signed notices, and account statements all bore my name, proving my sole responsibility. Years of quiet diligence became my hidden armor. No one saw the spreadsheets I maintained, the nightly audits of balances, or the folders stacked neatly in a cabinet labeled house records. Each payment was documented with dates, amounts, and confirmations, ready to show exactly what I had done. Even Cale, who lived without consequence, had no idea how close I had watched every detail. My parents never suspected that my compliance with their expectations had also been a form of protection. I had ensured nothing could be altered or ignored. It wasn't about catching anyone in a lie or proving a point in the moment. It was about safeguarding what was rightfully mine. Every late fee avoided, every record preserved, became evidence of my claim. Their ignorance gave me leverage they never anticipated. They thought control lay with them, but in reality, the power had quietly shifted into my hands. I didn't need confrontation yet, I only needed proof. For the first time, I felt a subtle strength replacing the weight of betrayal. They assumed I had nothing to enforce my rights. What they didn't know was that I had already ensured nothing could be taken without my agreement. In that silence, with records in my possession, the situation was no longer theirs to dictate. The quiet preparation I had maintained for years became my unseen advantage, waiting for the moment it would matter most. When the attorney finally went through the files, the room fell silent. Each signature, each recorded payment, each official statement pointed to one undeniable fact: nothing could move forward without my approval. The papers were airtight, leaving no room for interpretation or shortcut. The confidence in the room wavered. Faces that had been composed moments earlier tightened with unease. I could see them calculating, realizing that the assumed power they wielded was gone. Control had shifted quietly, but completely. My father's voice faltered the first time he tried to explain. Words that once sounded certain now stumbled over legal reality. He realized that all the assurances he had offered were meaningless in the face of documentation. Apologies started to surface, soft and hesitant, as if the truth alone demanded some form of acknowledgement. But they weren't sincere, they were born of necessity. They came because the advantage they had counted on had evaporated. Cale looked confused, unsettled. He had never encountered a barrier he couldn't push aside before. Now, every assumption he had made about entitlement collided with hard facts. His usual ease evaporated in the space of the room. Even my mother, who had avoided confrontation, now shifted uncomfortably. She understood that the safety net she had relied on for him was no longer available. The security she had granted him at my expense had limits she hadn't considered. The realization hit them: the house wasn't theirs to give. It wasn't a matter of choice or fairness, it was a legal impossibility. And suddenly, every demand, every expectation, Every casual dismissal of my effort crumbled in the face of evidence. For the first time, I saw the shift clearly. I wasn't fighting, I wasn't arguing, I wasn't seeking revenge. The law simply recognized what I had maintained all along, and that recognition changed everything. Their control had been an illusion, and the papers made it visible to everyone. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't about them losing, it was about finally being seen as I always had deserved to be. I didn't pick up the pen. I didn't give consent. Instead, I packed what mattered and left the house I had fought so hard to preserve. Every step away felt lighter, as though years of invisible weight were finally lifting. For the first time, I acted entirely for myself. No one influenced my choices. No one expected me to sacrifice or explain. I set boundaries that had never existed before, and I felt the strange, unfamiliar freedom of asserting them. Moving out wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. Every room I left behind represented expectations I refused to carry any longer. The mortgage, the household, the endless problem-solving, I walked away from it all with purpose. I reclaimed control over my finances. Money that had been quietly directed to save others was now mine to manage as I chose. Decisions that had once been dictated by guilt or duty became mine alone. I felt the power of ownership in a way I never had before. The house remained in legal limbo. My refusal to cooperate froze the situation entirely. Cale could no longer depend on handouts or quiet compliance. He had to confront responsibilities that had always been avoided. I watched from a distance as reality settled in. No lectures. No ultimatums. Just consequences he had never experienced before. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense, it was the natural result of finally refusing to be used. For the first time, I understood what it meant to put myself first without shame. My boundaries, once invisible, were now concrete. My decisions carried weight, and my life became defined by choice, not obligation. Walking away didn't close doors behind me, it opened the ones I had never dared to enter. In choosing myself, I discovered a freedom I hadn't realized I was missing, and a strength that belonged only to me. I didn't linger to argue or prove a point. I walked forward with calm determination, feeling an unfamiliar clarity in each step. The weight of years spent carrying burdens that weren't mine seemed to dissolve with every movement away from the house. Freedom didn't come with fanfare. It arrived quietly, as the realization that I no longer had to negotiate my value or justify my choices. I had been reclaiming more than a home, I had been reclaiming myself. The satisfaction wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, rooted in knowing that my energy, my time, and my resources were now protected. No one could take advantage of my reliability again. I had drawn boundaries that could not be crossed, and for the first time, they were respected without confrontation. Cale, my parents, they were left to face the reality of their decisions. The consequences of ignoring my contribution, of assuming I would always give without question, settled around them naturally. I didn't need to enforce punishment. Life did that quietly, as it always does. I felt lighter, but also stronger. Peace came not from triumph over others, but from the certainty that I had chosen myself. I had ceased being invisible in my own story. My worth was no longer optional in the eyes of those who had tried to erase it. For years, I had been measured by what I could provide. Now, I measured myself by what I would allow. That shift was far more powerful than reclaiming property, it was reclaiming life on my terms. Walking away wasn't about bitterness. It was about presence, clarity, and self-respect. My revenge wasn't in conflict, it was in freedom. I left with my dignity intact, boundaries unbroken, and the quiet knowledge that choosing myself was the strongest decision I could ever make. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away, or should I have given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories.